What are some other things like that might be a good multivitamin of sorts?
Yeah, I'm saying that on a healthy plant-based diet, you're not getting ideal levels of all nutrients. And certainly, we're keeping in mind that some nutrients that are derived from plants, we don't want to get in supplemental form or synthetic forms. Because let's say there are over 100 different types of carotenoids. So we don't want to take a beta-carotene supplement. We want to get that from food with all the different variety of carotenoids. If you take just one, you're taking a large amount of one item when it should be getting the whole spectrum. The same thing with vitamin E. There are 8 different vitamin E fragments. We don't want just one of those fragments at a high dose. We want to get these things from food. Most of the nutrients that we should receive from food, not from supplements. We know from research, modern research, that taking certain nutrients have the effect to extend human lifespan and protect the brain against aging and protect against immunosenescence as we age, because as we age, our immune system gets weaker and we could be exposed to cancer, but an infectious way to death like pneumonia. So I'm saying here that zinc is something that we don't get optimal exposure on a plant-based diet. We get exposure, but not optimal exposure to maximize human lifespan. So taking a little extra zinc is beneficial. And there are not 10 different forms of zinc that we're getting in the plant food. It's different than carotenoids or natural plant substances. Zinc is in plant food, but the phytates, of course, bind zinc and make it poorly absorbable. So vegans have a higher requirement for zinc. And there are numerous studies that show that prostate cancer, breast cancer, and especially pneumonia, infectious way to death, is lessened and impacted significantly by zinc supplementation. So vegans don't have ideal amounts of zinc, especially as they age. It's well known that B12 is deficient on a vegan diet and can impair neurologic function with aging. And I met a lot of people here who I interview and talk about, and they're not even taking B12 on vegan diets. They're still, nobody talks about this enough. And the third nutrient I feel is so important, these omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA, which I've seen in my career of more than 35 years as a doctor specializing in nutrition, and as the physician with the most experience, I think the most experience in the world caring for vegan populations, elderly vegan populations, and seeing the problems that could develop in those healthy eaters. And we're talking about Parkinson's dementia syndrome with low levels of those omega-3 fatty acids. We're just wanting to make sure that those 3 ingredients, zinc, EPA, DHA, and B12, are supplemented appropriately. And likewise, iodine, vitamin D, K2 are also things that are probably of lesser importance, but also valuable. It looks like the scientific literature points to a high probability of making sure your vitamin D is in the normal range, and a little extra K2 or a little extra, making sure you have some exposure to iodine if you're not salting your food or you're not exposed to seaweed or seafoods, to make sure your diet is iodine adequate. When I design my own supplements, because I don't want people taking folic acid, vitamin A, vitamin E, and high-dose B vitamin, doing things that could be potentially harmful. I want to just give them what they need without excess that they don't need that could be harmful. At the same time, I want to give them not too high a dose, and not just think of a little is good, more is better, because some of the supplements have too high of a dose in it. Because we have a sweet spot of nutritional excellence where deficiencies can cause a problem, and excess can also cause a problem. In other words, as an example, look at the studies relating fatty acid intake to atrial fibrillation. There's a lot of studies that show that if your level of omega-3 fatty acids, you're too deficient, you're at higher risk of atrial fibrillation. If you take too much of those fatty acids to high-dose fish oil, it could even promote atrial fibrillation. You could show, that's not good to take that. Those high-dose fish oil can cause this problem and that problem. Yeah, but that might be true. But neither is to being deficient good for you either. You want to be in that sweet spot, and that's where I'm trying to be very comprehensive in my investigation of the research, putting together all the information to make sure people hit that sweet spot, not radical amounts or deficiencies. No deficiencies, no radical excesses, but at the sweet spot of nutritional adequacy for all these nutrients that humans need. Just like too little iodine can cause hypothyroidism, and too much iodine can cause hypothyroidism. So we want to be in that sweet spot, not to take too much iodine, for example, but not to take none, right? Not to have no exposure. So I feel that as a physician specializing in nutrition, I'm very conservative and thoughtful about making sure people don't make nutritional mistakes that can impede their future and lead to dementia or Parkinson's disease in later life. Because I've seen a lot of people on healthy vegan diets develop neurological issues in later life due to these things we're talking about here.
The omega-3 test that looks at levels in your blood.
The omega-3 index.
Yeah,
it's called the omega-3 index. Yeah. Is the test to see if your level is adequate.
But now that isn't reflective of what's going on in the brain, though, right?
No, it's the red blood cell membranes. But your but your overall years of exposure to the proper omega-3 index in your blood correlates with brain size and cognition later on in life. So you're right, at an instantaneous level, this 3-month window of your level in your blood may not be indicative of good brain health and good brain size with fatty acids in the brain. You may have had a low level that's been deficient for the last 50 years. And all of a sudden you're taking supplements and your level is good. It could take years or a decade to fix for the brain to get the benefit of that. Which means that it's just the same thing with salt exposure. Okay, you get to be 70 years old and you cut the salt out of your diet because you have high blood pressure. Well, you were just exposed to high salt for 70 years. You're not going to have normal blood vessels and just because you cut the salt out after 7 decades of eating too much. It's your lifetime exposure to salt that weakens the blood vessels, and irrespective of its effect on blood pressure. It damages the interior lining of the blood vessels. Just like decades of exposure to a low omega-3 index or a low omega-3 for the brain can gradually lead to brain shrinkage, which may start in middle life. At the time brain shrinkage really occurs in later life, it may be too late to just take the supplement for a couple of months or a couple of years even and expect to have normal brain size. That doesn't mean that it's not very important to have a normal omega-3 index. It just means that we have to start it earlier in life to give ourselves decades of proper exposure for the brain not to develop cognitive impairment and brain shrinkage due to omega-3 fatty acid deficiency. We know one thing with more than 20 different corroborating studies that lower levels of the omega-3 index is linked to smaller brain sizes and more cognitive impairment with aging. That doesn't mean giving people a supplement when they're elderly is going to bring back the size of their brain. It might be too late for that.
But does it mean that giving them the supplement their whole life would have made a difference?
Yes, it means if they had the supplement the majority of their life, just like we want people to be off salt the majority of their life. We have adequate exposure to nutrition their whole life, not just let themselves become deficient and then at the last-ditch effort. It's like I always say, how stupid or how ridiculous is the position of the American Heart Association, which says that if you develop high blood pressure and heart disease, you should cut your salt intake back radically to not take in more than 1,500 milligrams of sodium a day. That is so ridiculous because if it's right for people with heart disease and high blood pressure to cut back on sodium, and by the way, 90% of Americans develop heart disease and high blood pressure with aging. But if that's right to do it then it would have been right to cut back when you were younger to prevent it from happening. So it should be taught in the schoolrooms and reading, writing, arithmetic, and nutritional science, and everybody in the population should be reducing their salt intake. We shouldn't be waiting to develop disease. That's like telling a person, when you develop lung cancer, you better cut back and quit cigarette smoking. That's ridiculous, obviously. Well, there's the same thing with DHA. We're not looking to wait till people develop diseases to treat it. We want people to have the right exposure throughout most of their life to protect brain shrinkage with aging. Yeah. This is when the most benefits occur, right?
I understand there's 20 studies showing this.
Yes.
Are they showing that supplementing would work?
Yes, there were studies that show that supplementing would work. However, not once people's brains shrink. No. And the point I'm making, the later in life, the more old you are when you try to fix a deficient level, the more inadequate and the less the likelihood of that supplement's going to work. If you want it to work, you have to start it when you're younger, before your brain shrinks.
Now, aren't there certain seaweeds or even chlorella that has some fatty acids?
Well, all green vegetables have short-chain omega-3 fatty acids like ALA, and we can convert some of that into EPA and DHA. But the ability of the body to convert is very genetically determined. It's determined by what you eat, by your inheritance, your genes. And we've done studies on this, and we see that there's a tremendous varying ability of some people to make adequate EPA and DHA and other people not to make adequate.
You heard of Dr. Udo?
Yes.
He says you'll have symptoms like dry elbows, watery eyes, There's ridiculous. No symptoms related to this?
Absolutely not. The first symptom could be your brain shrunk. The first symptom, B12 deficiency, could be irreversible neurologic damage.
He even said if you weren't capable of converting enough, you would just die right away.
Well, that's also incorrect, because vegans who are not eating any EPA and DHA have convert an adequate amount, even because the brain only needs a little bit for normal survival. Mm-hmm. So you don't need to supplement if you just want to live to be 60 or 70, maybe even 80 years old. And so we make enough for normal lifespan. Mm-hmm. If we want to have an extended lifespan, to make sure if you're going to live that longer and you want not the brain to atrophy in later life, then we're trying to do all the right things to maximize human lifespan. But if you're just talking about getting by and surviving to an average lifespan, then you probably could get by without it.
And your supplements, you're very careful, like with the fatty acids, to ensure they're not oxidized.
That's correct. Yeah. I heard people even saying here at the conference that they have taken the fatty acids and they taste funny, they make them feel, they get indigestion from it. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, that's because you're taking a rancid product. Mm-hmm. It's out of the refrigerator. It's not, so yes, because I've been involved with this for so many decades, mm-hmm. and actually treating, tens of thousands of individuals, mm-hmm. following my advice and getting feedback, mm-hmm. and knowing that about 20 years ago, when some people were getting a bad taste or indigestion or burping or from these omega-3 fatty acids, I would send them off to labs, independent laboratories, to have the TBA scores tested, mm-hmm. to see the degree of rancidity in the fatty acids they were using that I was actually recommending they use. And I found that many of these, as they stayed at room temperature for many months, 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, 12 months, as they increased the months at room temperature, they developed higher TBA scores and higher degrees of rancidity. So that's why I originally started procuring DHA for use for my family and my patients and my people, so I can get a product that I keep refrigerated and keep it from becoming rancid and keep it fresh. So they're taking a fatty acid supplement, they have something that's fresh, not out of the refrigerator for a year and a half.
Accessibility, these are kind of expensive, aren't they?
Mm-hmm, yes.
So it's not practical for a lot of people maybe that...
there aren't many people who are vegans. Most people get their fatty acids from eating fish. And most humans on the planet over the last 100,000 years, people ate some animal products. Well, frogs, snakes, fish, clams, whatever it is they ate, they got some exposure. Most people are not vegans. If we're going to go move to a vegan diet, and we're going to take a whole classification of food and push it off our plate for various reasons, mostly health reasons, then we have to make sure we're not pushing off our plate something that could be valuable in the process, and not be so cavalier or egotistical to think that what we are doing has no potential risks, and that's the problem. You have tremendous egos involved, because whatever people say or have been said for years, they don't want to change their mind. As new research accumulates, they don't question their own belief systems. They're so egotistical to keep pushing what they've done for years when more evidence becomes available. Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, this happens in all fields of science and all fields of knowledge. People, they're resistant to change, and we see it in the nutritional field as well. We have to be conservative and make sure we don't gamble with people's lives because our own philosophies are rigid. So now it's most likely the case that we're going to extend human lifespan by exposing ourselves to some of those beneficial compounds that come from fish without taking in the toxicity of fish in the process.